Dr. Elena Marsh had worked the night shift at Riverside Memorial for 6 years, and in all that time, nobody had ever seen the full tattoo that crept up from beneath her scrub collar. She kept the top button fastened, the collar high, and when curious coworkers asked about the faded ink peeking out near her collarbone, she simply said it was a mistake from her 20s, and changed the subject. Nobody pushed further. In a hospital where everyone had secrets, failed marriages, addiction battles, family tragedies tucked behind professional smiles, Elena's silence about a tattoo seemed like the least interesting mystery in the building. That Tuesday night started like any other. Rain hammered the windows of the emergency room as Elena moved between patients with the calm efficiency that made her a favorite among the residents. Dr. Marcus Webb, the attending physician, often joked that she moved like she'd been trained by the military, quick, precise, never wasting emotion. Elena would laugh it off, but there was always a flicker of something in her eyes when he said it, something none of them could quite name. At 2:47 a.m., the first alarm came from outside. Not from a patient monitor, not from an ambulance siren, but from the deep, rhythmic thumping that made the windows vibrate. Nurse Jenny Park looked up from her charting station, her pen frozen mid-sentence. "Is that?" she started to ask, but the sound answered for her. It was the unmistakable rotor wash of military helicopters, and it was getting closer. Elena's body reacted before her mind caught up. Her spine straightened, her breathing changed, and for just a moment, the exhausted ER doctor disappeared, replaced by someone else entirely, someone alert, someone calculating distances and threat vectors without even realizing she was doing it. She caught herself and forced her shoulders to relax, but Dr. Webb had already noticed. He'd seen that look on soldiers before, during his residency at a VA hospital. He'd never expected to see it on Elena. The ambulance bay doors began to shake as 2 Black Hawk helicopters descended into the parking lot outside, their spotlights cutting through the rain like blades. Patients in the waiting room gasped and pointed. A young mother pulled her children close. The overhead lights flickered from the sheer force of the rotor wash, and dust and debris swirled against the reinforced glass doors. "Everybody stay calm," Dr. Webb announced, though his own voice wavered. "This might be a mass casualty transport. Elena, get Trauma Bay 3 ready." But Elena wasn't moving toward the trauma bay. She was staring at the helicopters with an expression Jenny had never seen on her before, recognition. Not fear. Recognition. The bay doors burst open, and a team of operators in full tactical gear stormed through, weapons held with the casual confidence of men who'd done this 1,000 times before. Rain-soaked and grim-faced, they fanned out into the ER with practiced precision, checking corners, scanning faces. Patients screamed. A gurney clattered to the floor as a terrified visitor stumbled backward. At the front of the team was a broad-shouldered man with a jaw set like granite, his eyes scanning the room with military intensity. He held up a hand, and his men froze instantly, weapons lowering just slightly. He wasn't looking for a patient. He was looking for a person. His eyes landed on Elena. The room seemed to hold its breath. Dr. Webb stepped forward instinctively, positioning himself between Elena and the armed men, but Elena placed a hand on his shoulder and gently moved him aside. She wasn't afraid. She was standing taller than anyone had ever seen her stand, her chin lifted, her eyes locked on the man in tactical gear like she was staring down a memory instead of a stranger. "Ghost," the man said, and the entire ER fell into stunned silence. "We need Ghost." Nobody moved. Nobody understood. Ghost wasn't a name any of them recognized, not for their soft-spoken ER doctor who brought homemade banana bread to the nurse's station on Fridays, who cried during sad movies, who kept a photo of her golden retriever taped to her locker. Elena's hand rose slowly to the collar of her scrubs. For 6 years, she had kept it buttoned, kept the ink hidden, kept an entire chapter of her life sealed away in the deepest part of herself. But now, with 2 Black Hawks idling outside and a team of Navy SEALs standing in the middle of her emergency room, she understood that chapter was about to reopen whether she wanted it to or not. "That's not possible," Jenny whispered, backing away. "Elena doesn't even know how to use the defibrillator without the manual." But the tactical operator wasn't smiling, wasn't joking. His posture radiated urgency, the kind that came from men who had seen death up close and didn't have time for pleasantries. "Ma'am," he said, his voice lower now, almost pleading. "We have men down. We need someone who can operate under fire, someone with combat trauma experience beyond anything these civilian doctors have trained for. Command said you were the only one who could do this in time. Elena closed her eyes for just a moment. When she opened them, something had shifted. The careful, guarded ER doctor was gone, replaced by someone forged in a different kind of fire entirely. Her fingers finally moved to unbutton her collar, and as the fabric parted, the tattoo that had been hidden for 6 years came into full view, intricate military insignia interwoven with a design that told a story only a handful of people in the world would recognize. Dr. Webb's mouth fell open. Jenny gasped audibly. And the SEAL team leader simply nodded, as if a long-standing question had finally been answered. "What's your call sign?" he asked again, though this time it wasn't really a question. It was confirmation. Elena straightened her spine one final time, years of buried discipline snapping back into place like a soldier returning to formation. "Ghost," she said, her voice steady and unrecognizable to everyone who thought they knew her. "Now somebody get me your wounded before we lose them." The trauma bay transformed within seconds. What had been a routine Tuesday night shift became something out of a war zone as 2 wounded operators were rushed through the ambulance doors on stretchers, blood soaking through hastily applied field dressings. Elena, Ghost, moved with a speed and precision that left the entire ER staff frozen in shock, barking orders with an authority none of them had ever heard from her before. "I need 2 units of O-negative, now. Get me the rapid infuser and clear everyone who isn't essential personnel out of this bay." Her hands were already working, cutting away tactical gear with practiced efficiency, assessing wounds with a speed that seemed almost inhuman. The first operator had a gunshot wound to the abdomen, blood pooling despite the pressure bandage. The second had shrapnel wounds along his side, his breathing shallow and labored. Dr. Webb rushed to assist, his years of ER experience kicking in even as his mind struggled to process what he was witnessing. "Talk to me," he said, falling into step beside her. "What do you need?" "Chest tube kit, now." "This one's got a tension pneumothorax developing," Elena said without looking up, her fingers already finding landmarks on the wounded man's ribcage that most trauma surgeons would need imaging to confirm. The SEAL team leader, whose name tape read Harrison, stood at the edge of the bay, his jaw tight with barely controlled emotion as he watched his men fight for their lives. "You trained her," he said to nobody in particular, though Dr. Webb heard him. Command wasn't lying. "She really is the best combat medic they ever produced." As Elena worked, fragments of her hidden past began to surface in the urgent shorthand she used with Harrison, references to operations and places Dr. Webb had only read about in classified briefings his brother, an Army veteran, occasionally mentioned. She'd apparently served 3 tours as a special operations combat medic before an injury forced her into civilian medicine, where she'd spent 6 years trying to bury Ghost so deep that even she sometimes forgot she existed. The first operator stabilized under her hands, color returning to his face as the chest tube relieved the pressure building in his lung cavity. Elena moved to the second patient without pause, her focus absolute, her hands steady despite the chaos surrounding her. Jenny, who had initially backed away in fear, now found herself handing Elena instruments before she even asked for them, some part of her recognizing that she was witnessing something extraordinary. "Talk to me about the mission," Elena said to Harrison as she worked, not out of curiosity but because she needed information about the mechanism of injury. "IED. Small arms fire. I need to know what we're dealing with internally." "Ambush," Harrison said grimly. "We were extracting a HVT from a compound 3 hours from here when we took fire. These 2 took the worst of it protecting the package." His voice carried the weight of command, of watching men he was responsible for get hurt on his orders. 45 minutes later, both operators were stabilized enough for transport to a military hospital equipped for the specialized care they needed. As the helicopters prepared for departure, Harrison found Elena outside the trauma bay, her scrubs soaked with blood, her hands finally shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. 6 years, he said quietly. "We searched for you for 6 years after you dropped off the grid. Command wanted to know why our best combat medic just vanished." Elena leaned against the wall, exhaustion and old grief washing over her features. "Because I couldn't do it anymore," she admitted. "Not after Ramirez. Not after watching him die in my hands while I did everything right and it still wasn't enough. I needed to disappear into something quiet. Something where the stakes weren't always life and death measured in seconds." Harrison studied her for a long moment. "You saved 2 more lives tonight that most doctors couldn't have saved. Whatever quiet life you built here, Ghost, you didn't lose what made you exceptional. You just redirected it. Behind them, Dr. Webb and Jenny watched from a respectful distance, seeing their colleague in an entirely new light, not less than who they thought she was, but infinitely more. The gentle ER doctor who brought banana bread on Fridays was the same woman who had once carried wounded soldiers under enemy fire, the same steady hands that stitched playground scrapes had once closed combat wounds in the field. As the Black Hawks lifted off into the rain-soaked night sky, carrying the stabilized operators to specialized care, Elena remained in the ambulance bay, watching the aircraft disappear into the darkness. The rain had started to ease, and for the first time in 6 years, she didn't feel the need to button her collar back up. The tattoo remained visible, a reminder of who she had been and who she still was underneath the careful civilian disguise. Dr. Webb approached slowly, still processing everything he'd witnessed. "Ghost," he said, testing the name. "That doesn't quite fit the woman who cried during that dog movie last month." Elena managed a tired smile, the first genuine one Jenny had seen from her in ages. "Ghost was who I had to be to survive over there. Elena is who I get to be now that I'm home. Turns out I don't have to choose between them anymore." As dawn broke over Riverside Memorial, the ER staff returned to their normal rhythms, but nothing about that night would ever be forgotten. Elena Marsh had walked through those doors as a quiet, dedicated doctor with a mysterious tattoo. She walked back in as a hero whose true story had finally caught up with her, proving that the bravest people often hide their extraordinary pasts behind ordinary lives, waiting for the moment when the world needs them to become who they truly are. If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications, because stories like ghosts are exactly what this channel is built to tell, powerful, hidden histories of ordinary heroes living among us. Drop a comment below telling us what you think happened to Elena next, and share this video with someone who needs to believe that everyone has a story worth telling. We've got so many more incredible stories coming, and you won't want to miss a single one.